Adelina Comas-Herrera, the director of the Global Observatory of Long-Term Care, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the first meeting of this new interest group on migration, mobility, and care workers, which is, I think everyone will agree, a really, really timely and important topic to be looking at. So I'm going to share very briefly some slides for those of you who are new to the Observatory of Long-Term Care. The Global Observatory of Long-Term Care, we call it GOLTC, is a platform for cross-national learning to improve and strengthen care systems. It's part of the International Long-Term Care Policy Network, and the aim is to identify key shared challenges on long-term care and showcase how different countries and localities are addressing them, sharing research evidence and facilitating collaborations. And it's aimed at policymakers, industry advocates, care professionals, and academics. So far, we have 339 members. If you haven't registered yet, please do so. It's free. And so far, we have expertise in over 40 countries. The composition of the network at the moment is mostly academics, but increasingly we have policymakers joining, practitioners, and also some advocates as well, and representatives of provider organizations. We currently have 15 interest groups, and they have already organized, I think by now it's 20 webinars, and we are covering a wide range of topics linked to long-term care. We also have some webinars that are more focused on methods, and we have some also that, we have a group on Spain, so covering more care in a particular country. We have published 10 long-term care system profiles. A few more will be ready soon, looking at how different countries organize long-term care. And we're also establishing a collection of research methods, topic guides, and we have a blog as well where you can share some of your work if you're interested. And as we're building up the organization, registering some organizations as associate members as well, and building links with other international organizations. So to engage, as I said, best thing to do is to register as an expert, and I'm sure my colleague Nas will be sharing a link, the key link on how to do that. That way you can share your knowledge, find other people with similar interests, you can share what you're doing, and we have a newsletter at the beginning of every month. And after today's webinar, the next one is on Friday. It's on long-term care in Southern Africa, looking at what are the costs. We then have one on abolishing co-payments for social assistance in the Netherlands and what was the impact from the quasi-experimental interest group. And after that, we're also, well, before actually, on the 29th of October, we're planning a day-long event to mark the UN's Day of Care and Support. And we're currently seeking speakers for that. So if you're interested in speaking about unmet needs, community-based care, workforce, care homes of the future, or quality of care, please send us an email. We'll also copy the email on the chat. So that's all from me, and I'm delighted to hand over to Isabel Schutz, who's going to introduce the interest group.
Thank you, Adelina, and thank you to everyone for coming today. So the interest group on migration, mobility, and care workers is really aiming at understanding how these global challenges around the long-term care workforce and challenges in terms of labour shortages across many countries interact with international migration and mobility. And that includes how policies towards international migration have been a key part of government's response to address labour shortages and expand the long-term care workforce. So we have come together as a group to try to share our research in these fields. So as part of the steering group, myself and my colleagues, Eva Pallinger-Molenbeek, who's here with us today, Eva, Professor Ito Peng at the University of Toronto, Reiko Ogawa, who will be presenting today from Chiba University in Japan, and Natalie Morel at Sciences Po. We're all carrying out research in this area, and we really wanted to use this platform as a way of connecting researchers working in different country contexts on those issues. So we would very much welcome your ideas, suggestions. If you'd like to speak at a future webinar, we'd very much welcome that. And indeed, if you have current research or past papers that you'd like us to disseminate via the interest groups platform, that would also be very welcome. So I'm going to hand over to Reiko, who is going to be kicking off our webinar series, presenting what's been a sort of long-standing area of research. Reiko's got considerable expertise on the issue of migration and care work, and she'll be looking at these issues in relation to Japan specifically. So Reiko, thank you very much.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to meet the experts from similar fields, I would say, to share the similar kind of interests. So today I'm going to talk about the intersection of migration and care work in Japan and how it has been transformed and where it is heading. So the outline of my presentation is like this. I will provide some introduction, and then I will elaborate how the transformation of migration and care nexus has taken place in the past decade. And I will explain about how the migrants were entering into the care sector under the COVID-19, which I think is quite unusual. And then finally discuss about the neoliberal turn of the long-term care insurance, which has been like 20 years of inception since year 2000. So the scholarships on migration and care has flourished over the past decades, and we have been seeing a lot of work on how the migrant women are entering the reproductive work in private households. But at the same time, research has shown that the incorporation of migrants into the care labor market differs significantly among different countries. And in East Asia, this has been done by Ito Pen's work, that she argues that Japan and South Korea differ significantly from other countries like Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore in terms of the use of migrant workers. So despite the growing care needs, Japan and Korea's restrictive immigration policy remains as an exception. And she says that she classifies Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore as a liberal private market approach, where the state would actively promote the use of the domestic and care workers by liberalizing the regulations and providing incentives for families to employ the migrants, while as in Japan and Korea is considered to be the regulated institutional approach, where the state has introduced the long-term care insurance, which is a public social insurance to support care, and the use of the migrants are really very limited. So having these kind of comparative perspective in mind, I would like to focus more on Japan today. So Japan's aging population is unprecedented, sharing 30% of the population above 65 years old. We have a very long life expectancy, 87 years old for women and 81 for men. And Japan introduced a long-term care insurance in year 2000 that aimed for socialization of care, and this is like a mandatory social insurance to shift the care responsibility and financing of care from the family to the society. And then since 2008, migrants started to undertake long-term care and it gradually expanded its scope. Currently, there are at least 4 migration corridors for migrants to enter the care labor market. So the research question I'd like to address today is that how does the diverse channels affect migrant care workers and transform the intersection of migration and care? My research methodology is qualitative with interviews and participant observations with different stakeholders. So now I would like to go into the transformation of migration and care nexus which took place in 3 phases. First, it was this introduction of the long-term care insurance, where the care labor market has expanded very quickly The funding of the LTCI is consisted by 50% insurance premium and 50% tax from both national and local governments. And then in phase 2, the migrant care workers under this free trade agreement called Economic Partnership Agreement started in 2008 with a very limited countries. That's from Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. And then in phase 3, the deregulation of migration regime started since 2017, where 3 more migration corridors were introduced, one after the other. The second one was the international students to study in vocational schools. And after the graduation, they are given the residential status called long-term care visa. And that can be renewed without for indefinite period. And then the third channel was this TITP, Technical Internship Trainee Program, which was initially started in the 1990s, but then it's purely a guest worker kind of program with a limited, with a short-term rotation labor migration. But in 2017, care work was included in the occupation list. And in from 2019, Specified Skilled Worker, SSW, was introduced. So this was a purely a labor migration program. And one would wonder why it needs to have so much complication. And of course, these are up to the past dependency, but moreover, it's due to the lack of immigration policy on the side of the government. But it happened that the lack of discussion on how to incorporate migrants into the care labor market. So for phase 1, when the LTCI started, the care labor market had expanded very quickly, both in terms of number of care receivers and the number of care workers. So the number of care receivers in the past 20 years has increased by 2.8 times. The number of care workers increased by 3.3 times. And so as the budget, the LTC expenditure increased from 3.6 trillion yen to 11.4 trillion yen. And by 2025, 2.4 million care workers are needed because the post-war baby boomer generation will reach the age of 75. But then since 2011, Japan's population has started to decrease. And then in phase 2, after the expansion of the introduction of the LTCI, the government-to-government free trade agreement called EPA had started with the Southeast Asian countries. So this was started in a very limited manner. And the people who came were highly qualified. So they were like university graduates or nursing school graduates. And then they were required to pass the national certification examination. And if they are certified, their residential status will be extended indefinitely. And in order to pass the exam, there were a lot of public assistance coming in. First of all, they had 1 year of free Japanese language training. And even after start working, various supports to pass the national exam were being provided. So you can see the picture that those EPA care workers from Indonesia has taken classes to study after their work. But in phase 3, the deregulation of migration regime started in 2017, opening up of new migration corridors. So the students, the TITPs, and the SSW, and you can see that the number of the migrant care workers has increased rapidly. Regarding the aim, eligibility to apply, Japanese language level, recruiter, brokers, period of stay, and salary. For all these things, the 4 channels differ, and it is very complicated to understand, and I don't have time for it today. But one of the things that is interesting is that except for EPA, number 2, number 3, and number 4, these are all run by private agencies. And also for number 3 and number 4, the period of stay is limited for maximum 5 years. For TNTPs, they can shift to SSW, but it's basically a guest worker program. And for the salary, in the government document, it says equivalent to Japanese, but it would never say equivalent to which Japanese, because in the care sector, different kinds of employment has been taking place. So people come from different backgrounds, and the people are employed in different kinds of employment contracts, but it doesn't specify about the salary. Now, regarding these very diverse migration corridors, the recent OECD report states that it is overlapping and complex and has to be consolidated. And I have spoken to many people, but everybody says that every channel has come from the past dependency, so it's difficult to consolidate. And even when I spoke to the Philippine government, which is one of the major sending country, they have established this Department of Migrant Workers under the Duterte regime. They would say that even they have the Japan desk, they would say that it's very complicated to understand. So, and if the government of the sending country could not understand the system properly, how can we expect the migrants to understand? Now, since the migration regime has changed, the number of the migrants in the care sector has increased. And so currently, the number of the migrant care workers share 3% of the 2.14 million care workers. But then what is interesting to me was that between 2020 to early 2023, the national border has been closed due to the COVID-19. So the labor migration was literally stopped. However, as you can see, the number of the migrants who are working in the care sector continue to increase. So that was a kind of a puzzle to me. And if you remember during the COVID-19, what had happened to the care sector is that the infection control was very strict. And of course, it has to be strict due to the protection of those patients. And then there was this repeated clusters happening, taking place in many of those care facilities. So the caregivers were like strictly controlled, and they were not allowed to travel or to go to any kind of gatherings. And of course, when those infection took place, the infected persons cannot always be hospitalized. So they had to be taken care inside the care facility. That means the care workers will have the risk of being infected. But despite the fact, interestingly, the number of the care workers kept on increasing in Japan. So this is the population aging in Asia with Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and Japan, and the number of migrant care workers in East Asia. And you would immediately realize that the aging ratio and the number of the migrant care workers does not necessarily match, which reminds us of the Itopen's argument to say that the liberal private market approach and regulated institutional approach. And interestingly, in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan, when the national borders were closed, the number of the migrants decreased. However, in Japan, the number of the migrants increased. So why is that? So here comes the interview. Well, of course, there are people who have left Japan due to fear of being infected. And those people who cannot build trust with the Japanese co-workers due to language and cultural barriers. Care work is, of course, a physically demanding job. So some have left. For those who cannot see the future working as a care worker. However, there are those who stayed, and even those who deliberately choose to become a care worker. So he is from Indonesia and he completed the Japanese language school in March 2020, exactly the time when the border was closed. So he could not go back to Indonesia due to the pandemic. So he only had the experience of working at the convenience store, but happened to land up in care work. He liked caring because he thought that care work is a noble job. So he took the SSW exam, which is not that difficult, and passed. And he now wants to become a certified care worker so that he can bring his wife and children to Japan. So here we can see that there's a cultural appropriateness of care work and also the citizenship being tied to the national certificate. And also it allows the family reunion. We can bring his immediate family to Japan if he passes the certified care worker exam. The other person from China, she graduated from a national university in Japan, and while she was a student, she used to work as a part-time worker in the care facility. And after graduation, she decided to become a SSW care worker. And then she took the certified care worker exam and became certified. So she loves anime and manga. And with her care worker visa, she can stay in Japan as much as she wants. So she thinks that care work is a very stable employment with full social security benefits. So in a way, care work visa becomes instrumental for her to stay in Japan. I was part of this research to look into the entry channel for SSW care workers, and we found that 33% of them came from Japanese language school, and 32% came from TITP other sectors like manufacturing or other types of work. And for those who are under the EPA and did not pass the national exam, also decided to work as SSW care workers. So the people come from diverse channels. But then the reason why they choose SSW care work, close to half of them said that they wanted to become a certified care worker. 24% said that they want to live in Japan for a long time. So this diverse migration channels allow them to flexibly shift from one status to the other. Now, what is this national license for certified care worker? One would wonder. It was established in 1987 and it's a national exam in Japanese language. It has 125 questions and you have to answer that in 220 minutes. So it's quite laborious. And but it's a multiple choice question, so one can try the luck. And these are the kinds of subjects. So it does have some medical component, but not too much. And the passing ratio for Japanese is 60 to 70%. But then for the EPAs, it's not that different. And in fact, the Vietnamese has a higher passing ratio than Japanese. And this is because that for the Japanese exam takers, some of them will enter care work in their middle age, and they are taking the exam while they are working. So while as the migrants are normally come as fresh graduates, and especially for the EPAs, they are from the nursing background. So that is why the passing ratio is not that different from Japanese. And for the care workers, what does it mean to become a certified care worker? Well, if they are certified, they will have access to the citizenship and they can stay as much as they want. And of course, in a way, it is a kind of a career, although to what extent it can be considered professional is debatable. But at least if there will be a chance that you will become a manager or in some kind of managerial position once you have the certificate. And of course, you can bring your immediate families and you are free to change your employee once you are certified. But the support is uneven depending on the migration corridors. So for the TITPs and SSWs, the Japanese language and the support to pass this national exam has not been granted. So if you're working in the same care facility with different people, they will experience relative deprivation. And then the other concern is that the labor shortage has been very, very severe, very chronicle. So when you ask the care facility as well as the migrants, they would say that the care facility cannot provide resources for training. So the Chinese TITP care worker says, we only have just a few staff to care for many elderly. I want to learn Japanese because I'm afraid that I cannot communicate well in emergency cases. This makes me feel uncertain, but the facility cannot provide resources for Japanese language training. So then that would bring us to the question, what are the chances for TITPs and SSW to pass the exam? So here we see the segmented care labor market, that the chances are unevenly distributed. I mean, if you can pass the national exam, you will have access to citizenship and professionalization. But then these chances may not be given to those people who come under TITP or SSW, and then they have to return home. If we put this into the transnational perspective, the educational background and their status in the labor market does not necessarily match, because it all depends on the migration channel that they choose. So we may face a case where the classmates of the same university or the classmates of the same nursing school may end up in different kinds of labor outcomes. And we know from the past scholarships that the migrants may not have all the information when they make the decision to migrate. So this accelerates another kind of inequality. Then if we go back to the comparative migration care nexus in East Asia, Japan's migrant care workers are very, very fragmented, and they are spread across this permanent, temporary, skilled, and unskilled diagram. Well, as in Taiwan, there were 230,000 people in this unskilled temporary residency box. And in Korea, mostly the care work has been undertaken by the Korean Chinese migrants, but they don't come based on the kind of work that they do, but they come as co-ethnics. So we don't actually know what kind of status they have. But then with the opening up of the new migration corridors in Japan, the TITPs and SSW, which we already have 370,000 of them, would definitely be located in this unskilled temporary residency box. So this makes us wonder that whether this would be, even though there is a path dependency, we are seeing some kind of convergence with the Taiwan migration and care nexus. Finally, I would like to discuss about the neoliberal turn of the LTTI after 20 years of implementation of this long-term care insurance. As I mentioned, the care market and the care recipients has increased very, very quickly, and so as the financing of this LTTI. The monthly payment of LTTI premiums also increased from 2,911 yen to 6,700 yen for the national average. So what we see today is that, of course, the Ministry of Finance would try to restrict the LTCI expenditure that affects the quality and quantity of the care service. And already in 2014, admission to LTCI care facilities became limited to those with higher care needs. And in 2022, there are more than 250,000 old age people waiting to be placed in care facilities under LTCI, but the capacity is not enough to accommodate everybody. So if LTCI cannot cater to the growing care needs, the unmet care needs have to either turn to the market or to be pushed back to the family, even though no family members can provide care. Migrants are a constitutive part of these two directions. Private nursing homes outside of LTCI have been multiplying to meet the care needs of those who cannot be accommodated in the care facility under LTCI. And in 2014, the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare drastically agreed to permit migrants to work in home care. Until this time, migrants were only allowed to work in institutional care before they passed the national exam. And mostly they are in the institutional care only. And there was a huge reluctance to let the migrants to work in home care. But then suddenly this was a big turn. So as a conclusion, responding to the aging population and labor shortage, Japan opened up diverse corridors to accept migrants in the care sector. Migration policy plays a pivotal role in shaping care provision as well as the nature of the welfare state. On the one hand, the diverse corridors provided flexibility for migrants to change their residential status. But on the other hand, it creates complexity, confusion, and stratification. The recent policy developments may increase the number of migrants, but also the inequality among them. While care work can provide stable employment, career development, and citizenship for migrants, the neoliberal turn of LTCI leads to marketization and refamiliarization of care. Migrants are an integral part of this disposition. To maintain quality care, decent working conditions should be ensured for both native workers and migrants, and the migrants should be given opportunities for career development and training, regardless of their entry channels. Yes, this is the referral. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reiko Ogawa, for this very rich opening lecture, which poses so many questions, and I am afraid that we have too little time, but just not to lose time which we have. It's around 20 minutes, more or less. I would like to open the floor for the discussion, for your questions, understanding questions, whatever questions you have. So, yes, I see just Jose Luis Fernandez, the first one.
And thank you for a very interesting presentation. So overall, I mean, one important takeaway for me is really, even if there's some opening of for migrant workers, there's still very few, really, relatively speaking. And I was wondering why that is. Why is the system not being reformed if there is such an acute need for more, workforce? I was in particular interested in understanding what the position of the providers is. Because I was told that many years ago that the providers had been quite important in shaping the nature of the insurance system in terms of just being care blind, not taking into account, trying to maximize the demand for the private providers. And I was wondering whether private providers were were instrumental in not allowing more migrant workers to come in and perhaps work outside of the formal sector, of the sort of regulated formal sector.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Yes, well, yeah, I think due to the population aging and the declining of the population, there are lots of discussions about the migrant workers, but still, I think there is no consensus as to what extent Japan is going to accept the migrants. And there is a very strong conservative faction among the ruling party that are against the acceptance of the migrants. And I think there's a lot of literature stating that the homogeneity of the Japanese would be, and also the national identity would hinder the acceptance of the migrants. And that is even said in Ito Pen's work, that extremely reluctant and very stubborn in not trying to accept the migrants. I think that is why the number is still very small, but I think still a lot of people are already aware that without the migrants, it is getting very difficult to maintain the social infrastructure, including care. So that is why in 2019, this SSW was introduced. But the problem of that is with the migration governance, that the migration governance and regulation has been very weak for the SSW, and there is no responsible body who would be taking care of those migrants until they obtain the permanent residency. And Japan is a country that almost nobody would speak English in your daily life. So that means it's really very difficult for them to say, like, having access to medical care, having access to education. So we still have a very long way to go. So the society is trying to adapt to this demographic change, but still there is no consensus. And that's the answer to your first question. The second question about the providers is that I think there are a lot of difference between those traditional care providers, which mainly comes from the social welfare sector, and those who come from the business sector. So there are different approaches, different ideas about care between those two groups. So the social welfare group has been what can I say, kind of cautious, but really more humane and trying to provide support to the migrants as well as to their own workers, while as the business sector is more aggressively pursuing their business and trying to make profit. So I think the providers are not monotonous. They don't speak in one voice, but they are differentiated according to their background and how they want to pursue with this political agenda. So did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Simone Leiber is the next one.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I have done a bit of research on the role of the brokerage agencies, and therefore I wondered if you could elaborate a bit on the situation in Japan now and what those changes mean for the agencies. You mentioned them in one of your slides, but I wondered really whether the different ways or paths or what this makes with the agency market and how they might differentiate their tasks and what their role in, especially in the qualification of the workers is or may be. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, that's a very good point from the migration industry perspective. For the TITPs, if you remember, Technical Internship Training Program, they have a huge migration industry. And these people has been working together with the sending agency in the sending country. So they have their own counterparts in Southeast Asia, China, etc. And they have been into the training of those migrants, the prospective migrants, and they are instrumental in making them very docile, if you know what I mean. So, and I wrote something about the usage of the Japanese language, that language teaching has been used to discipline those migrants, that has been taking place in the sending country in collaboration with those agencies. And then when the SSW was introduced, those brokerage has been criticized that because they have been charging, overcharging the placement fees from the migrants. And also they have been conducting abusive practices to the migrants so that some of them will become undocumented. They simply run away. And that has been criticized. So then the government changed the name and changed the role of those agencies, that they are no longer in the position to supervise the migrants, but they provide advice to the employers by providing their services like Japanese language training or supporting their daily lives. So they changed the role, they changed the name, and so it's a kind of a disguise of how this migration industry is continue to growing under different names, or we can call it a rebranding of the of the migration industry. So currently, in terms of migration governance, the TITP with this what is called I don't know the English name, but those receiving agency, they were being held responsible in case anything happens to the migrants. So, like for example, occupational injury, or if they fall sick, or whatever, the agency has been held responsible, and they have to pay the fee for the migrants to return to their home country. However, under the SSW, this rebranded agency has no responsibility whatsoever under the name that the migrants are free laborers. So in a way, the protection is also gone. But since all these diverse channels are so complicated and it requires a lot of documentation bureaucracy, the care facility will have no choice but to give all the paperwork by paying those agencies. So what I think is that this rebranding of the names and the migration channels will just benefit the migration industry to grow, but much more in a sophisticated manner.
That was really interesting. Thank you so much, Reiko, and certainly made me think of lots of questions, which I could perhaps follow up with you afterwards on. But just thinking about the different tracks that you highlight, and which is actually quite unique in thinking about the way in which Japan has this has actually sort of proactively pursued these different pathways. I mean, we know that in other country contexts, of course, people working in the sector involve many different groups of migrants. So in Europe, it might include people who are EU citizens moving to a country. It might include people who have come as family members, or indeed it might include students. But that's more a sort of effect of the fact that the care sector desperately needs workers, and it's often the place where it's seen as a sort of way of entering the labour market for many recent migrants. But I was wondering, so you talked about the ways in which people from different tracks, including other sectors, TITPs from other sectors, want to move into the CC, they want to get the CCW, they want to become certified care workers, partly because that's a means of accessing stability and residence within Japan. So that's a means of getting access to permanent residence, to citizenship, and indeed to bring your own family to Japan. But how, I know that you've written about how, that's quite actually difficult because of sort of language issues. So I was just wondering whether you could say a bit more about whether people do effectively become certified care workers and establish themselves within Japan, or is that really a sort of dead end for them?
Right. Thank you very much. Well, I think one of the reasons is that migrants in Japan are still not that much, and that is why we don't have a diverse pool of people. Of course, we do have marriage migrants, and marriage migrants too do enter the care sector, like the Filipinos or those people from Latin America. They do enter, and the reason is because that it is quite difficult for them to read and write Japanese. So that hinders them to go into the office work. While as care work, it's more verbal, it's more communicative. So the marriage migrants do enter. We do have students who are also working as part-timers, but compared to other service sectors, the wage of care work is not that high. So if you are a student and if you want to do a part-time work, you would prefer to work in a bar or something. So we do have students, but not that much. And then regarding the certified care worker issue, we do have people who have already passed the exam. The EPA, quite a number, so as the TITPs. And we don't have the whole picture as to what percentage has passed and what percentage has failed to do so. So we don't know exactly how many have passed. But from time to time, those people who are like extremely smart would study by themselves, and they do pass by themselves. So, but then it doesn't really provide the basis for everybody to have access to citizenship. So I think that's one of the next step that we would like to pursue as a policy agenda, to provide a common base for everybody to be able to study and to be able to pass the certified care worker exam.
Okay, so yes, okay, Jason Schneck. I'm not sure if my pronunciation is correct. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah, it was perfect. Yes.
So we have something like 5 minutes left before we close the discussion.
Perfect. Yeah, very quick, very good presentation. I was just curious in this with these migrant care workers doing the exam and the qualification and the precarious situations a lot of time they're in. Did you find in your research if the trade unions are involved in any type of organizing or strategies with these migrant workers to maybe help them or make the situation better, I suppose?
Very good question. Our trade unions, we do have trade unions supporting migrants, and we do have trade unions for the care workers or the health professionals. But yes, in case there are some labor issues, I think the trade union for migrants would step in due to the language ability. And yes, we had some cases regarding the EPA care workers that, for example, the overtime payment was not being paid, or they could not get the paid holidays. Some got pregnant. And yeah, so that kind of issue. So there were the labor unions that is supporting migrants who would step into that. We also have a transnational network of scholars and NGOs who are supporting the migrants. So it's not for every country, but from time to time, we do like consultations. We do write papers together with the scholars from the sending country by looking into the specific issue that the migrants are facing. So yes, we from time to time, we do have that kind of organizing and resources available, including journalists and lawyers, the legal experts to support. the protection of the migrants really differ from country to country, and it really depends on the country's policy. Like, for example, once they become undocumented, we would know that the Philippine embassy would be really good in taking care of them, while as the other embassies may not be reacting in the same way. So yes, in the meantime, we are struggling to find out the better solutions for the migrants.
Thank you.
Mhm. So my question to you, Reiko, you mentioned one on the slides that you observe diminishing capacities of care facilities to invest in training. Yes, and what we heard from your lecture is yes, increasing role of the care markets of market actors. Yes, to take on these tasks. So my question is about the state's role in it. If there are any discussions on, how to improve the situation, to invest maybe money into the sector in form of subsidies or whatever. So I know it's a complex question, but maybe.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, actually, the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare has been requesting the budget to the Ministry of Finance. And of course, things like scholarships for those international students studying care work has already been given. And that is quite a lot of amount. But also, they have been requesting the Ministry of Finance to support the studies for those, the migrant care workers, regardless of where they come from. So like language training and how they prepare for the exam, that kind of things can be standardized, and it can be there's already a curriculum and the textbook, so there is a way that you can pursue your study, prepare for the exam very well. So they are really trying to ask for the budget for the Ministry of Finance, because unless we will be able to secure the migrant care workers, the LTCI is going to collapse. There would be no service, even though the people are paying for the insurance premium, and that's going to be scandalous. So still, the number is very small, but we all know that the care labor is in such a shortage, and that has to be met by either the AI or by the migrants, right? So for the migrants, since care is a relational work, we want them to speak Japanese, because no Japanese elderly will speak the languages of Southeast Asia or any language at all. So we have to invest on them, and the Ministry of Health and Labor is aware of that.
Thank you very much. So last question to you. Where do we find articles, texts that this lecture is based on? On your homepage?
Oh dear. Yes, I have to submit the paper by the end of this month.
I see.
Yes, and there's going to be a book chapter probably next year.
Next year, okay. So we are looking forward to read it. I'm just I am very interested in this material you presented, and there are so many details we couldn't talk about. And yes, our time is running out now. Thank you very much, especially to you, Reiko, for this great lecture, but also great discussion, conversation with us. And I have the feeling, yes, Isabel would like, I will hand over to you. Yes, I would like to read about it and to discuss with you even more. So it was a great start, I think. And now I hand over to Isabel.
Thanks, Eva, and many thanks, Reiko, for a fascinating presentation. And indeed, it would be great if we could share some of your work in this area to colleagues via the interest groups webpage. So we will, just to others who are interested in reading Reiko's work, we'll share some links to existing publications, and of course wait patiently for other work that's forthcoming next year. So thank you everybody for taking part in our first webinar for this particular interest group. And as I said previously, we'd welcome suggestions for future speakers. And indeed, if you would like to present in one of our future webinars, please do get in touch and yeah, share your ideas. That would be great. And we'll be in touch in due course with details on the future program of webinars. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.